On the night of the 21st of September 1941, a Royal Air Force transport plane took off from an airfield in the desert outside Cairo. On board was Lieutenant Jasper Maskelyne, a former stage magician. He'd been ordered to create the greatest illusion of his life: to make the Suez Canal, all 100 miles of it, disappear. It was a critical moment in the war in North Africa. The desert was an unrelenting landscape, empty of foliage and buildings. Its vast distances made it almost impossible to hide. The British would need all their ingenuity, courage, and deception to outwit the Axis juggernaut. This program tells the story of midnight raids, code-busting, and grand illusions, some of the greatest secrets of the Second World War. On the 10th of June 1940, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini declared war on Great Britain. He'd seen the French and British collapse before the Nazi blitzkrieg. Now he wanted to follow in the footsteps of his fascist comrade, Adolf Hitler. Mussolini immediately deployed 250,000 soldiers to the Libyan desert, under the command of Marshal Rodolfo Graziani. Mussolini wanted to push Britain out of North Africa and planned to take a naval base at Alexandria and then capture the Suez Canal, the great waterway linking the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, and a vital supply route to British Imperial India. To oppose Graziani, Britain could only muster 36,000 men under the command of General Archibald Wavell. He needed accurate intelligence on the Italian movements. Fortunately, an army unit had recently been formed to provide just that information. Under the command of Major Ralph Bagnold, seen here on the right, the long-range patrol was developed for deep penetration strategic reconnaissance. Self-reliant and adaptable men were needed, with mechanical expertise to maintain their vehicles over vast distances in hostile terrain. Bagnold drew a significant number of them from New Zealand troops. Many of them were farmers in New Zealand and were used to living in harsh conditions. Others came from Rhodesia and South Africa, only a few from Great Britain. Its first vehicles were commercial Chevrolet trucks commandeered from the Egyptian army and the local Chevrolet dealer. In time, the unit was equipped with 30 of these Canadian-made trucks, the hallmark of this pioneering formation. The unit's first patrol began on the 7th of August 1940. The trucks were equipped with enough fuel, weapons and rations for 30 men to last 3 weeks, traveling over 1,200 miles of desert. The early patrols studied the position of the Italian army in the Western Desert as it advanced on Egypt. On the 13th of September 1940, Graziani launched his attack. The British forces fell back. Wavell badly needed those 36,000 men. For now, he could only use delaying tactics. The only way to hold off the fascist assault was to convince the Italian forces that Britain already had a massive army on the ground, ready to counterattack. The task of deception was given to Dudley Clark, a 41-year-old colonel on Wavell's staff. Earlier, in London, Clark had helped assemble an elite force of commandos to carry out raids against the Germans in occupied Europe. With similar imagination and energy, Clark assembled a team to create the illusion of a colossal army in the desert, known as A-Force. Hundreds of dummy tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks made from rubber were blown up like balloons. Clark had fake roads laid and vehicle tracks printed in the sand. This was just the beginning of the deception. Local Arabs were recruited to ride their horses and camels and drag planks behind them to create clouds of dust in the desert. From the air, it looked as though a major army was on the move. British anti-aircraft guns stopped Italian reconnaissance aircraft from flying too low to spot the deception. Many of these lessons in desert camouflage were later adopted by the Americans. In this rarely seen wartime training film, fake rocks are being used as disguised firing positions. Jeeps were painted with camouflage patterns to blend in with the local terrain. Marshal Graziani was completely fooled by the ruse and believed a major British force was about to attack his right flank. British intelligence agents reinforced the hoax by allowing the Italians to break coded but false messages that signaled a growing mass of British reinforcements in Egypt. It was enough to make Graziani halt. He told his troops to dig in and wait for the onslaught. By the time he realized there was no real imminent attack, it was too late. 36,000 British reinforcements finally arrived from India and Australia. Wavell attacked Graziani, and by mid-December had thrown the Italians out of Egypt, back into Libya. The British captured tens of thousands of prisoners. As Wavell advanced, the long-range desert patrols resumed their reconnaissance missions. Renamed the Long-Range Desert Group in December 1940, they were expanded to 6 units operating from secret bases deep behind enemy lines. Information gathering remained the primary aim, but they also struck vulnerable Italian positions, like airfields and fuel dumps, often hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. They also attacked isolated Italian garrisons and vehicle convoys. The Italians responded by reinforcing them with troops drawn from frontline units. The secret desert raiders became a serious irritation to the Italian High Command. In early 1941, Wavell resumed his main assault on the Italians. His 7th Armored Division, known as the Desert Rats, decimated the enemy. 130,000 Italians were taken prisoner at a cost of just 500 dead and 1,200 wounded British. The Italians unconditionally surrendered. It was a deeply humiliating defeat for Mussolini. In Berlin, Hitler was shocked, but determined to re-establish power in the Mediterranean. There was only one man, he felt, who could do the job. On the 12th of February 1941, General Erwin Rommel arrived in North Africa with the Afrika Korps. Within a few weeks, he would inspire a remarkable counterattack. British High Command would now have to pull off some of its most complex and ingenious acts of deception. General Erwin Rommel had his eye on Egypt, the ultimate prize in a deadly game of cat and mouse played out in the desert of North Africa. With the capture of Egypt, Nazi Germany would be able to cut the Suez Canal, Britain's imperial artery, and take the oil fields of the Middle East. Rommel launched his major offensive on the 24th of March 1941, leading a combined German and Italian army to blitz the British 2nd Armoured Division in Libya. He quickly captured the port of Benghazi and trapped the Australian 9th Division in Tobruk. The rest of the British Army was thrown back into Egypt. The Suez Canal was now within Rommel's grasp. At this critical point, Lieutenant Jasper Maskelyne arrived in Cairo. In his late 30s, Maskelyne was a renowned illusionist and stage magician in great demand throughout Europe. In 1939, he tried to join the British forces, but he was turned down because he was too old. In 1940, Maskelyne secured a post with Professor Frederick Lindemann, chief scientific advisor to Winston Churchill. Maskelyne told Lindemann he could create amazing illusions on the battlefield. The following year, he was given a commission and sent to British headquarters in Egypt to work in the camouflage section. Meanwhile, Rommel was increasing the pressure and launched a major assault on the British and Commonwealth garrison at Tobruk. Wavell held out, but his counterattack failed. He was then replaced by General Claude Auchinleck. Major Geoffrey Barkas, chief of the camouflage section in Egypt, asked Maskelyne to devise a way of stopping the Germans bombing the port of Alexandria. Next to the port was Mariot Bay. Maskelyne set up lights in the bay to look like the port, and when the bombers approached Alexandria, the lights of the harbour were blacked out and the lights of the bay switched on. The enemy pilots were confused and dropped their bombs in the wrong place. Alexandria had seemingly disappeared. With this success, Barkas had an even more extraordinary idea: to hide the Suez Canal, even though the waterway was 103 miles long. It was designed by the French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps in 1859 and took 10 years to build. In its time, it was considered a wonder of the modern world. Now, the principal threat to the canal was from Luftwaffe bombers. Maskelyne and his colleagues, dubbed the Magic Gang, flew to the canal to inspect its defenses. They knew that water was easy to spot from the air, but Maskelyne remembered how he distracted his audience during disappearing tricks by using puffs of smoke or bursts of light. He decided to use a similar principle, but on a massive scale. Maskelyne would use searchlights to effect the disappearance of the canal, but conventional searchlights were much too small. Working with the Royal Engineers, Maskelyne and the Magic Gang solved the problem by having 24 small tin reflectors welded to a curved steel band secured around the searchlight lens, creating 24 individual beams from one light. Each beam was just as strong as the original, penetrating 9 miles into the sky. To make this dazzling effect even more potent, Maskelyne transformed the beams into spinning cartwheels of intense light rays. A practice demonstration was carried out on the night of the 21st of September. Maskelyne took off as a passenger in a Royal Air Force transport plane and flew over the test lights in the desert outside Cairo. The result was spectacular. With the beams ignited, they projected 24 fingers of light into the night sky, which then suddenly spun round. Light flooded the cabin. Blinded by the light, the pilot lost control and the aircraft plummeted towards the earth. At barely 400 feet above the ground, the pilot managed to regain control. Maskielyne's illusionary light ray was a frightening success. A chain of 21 of them was constructed, along the entire length of the Suez Canal. Several Luftwaffe raids were flown over the canal, but none of the German pilots could see through the dazzling circles of light. Maskielyne had achieved the impossible and helped save British Egypt. Rommel received another setback when newly appointed General Auchinleck struck back in November 1941. The offensive pushed Rommel back to his original position in Libya. It looked like stalemate, but Rommel, true to his nickname, the Desert Fox, was not so easily outwitted. Across North Africa, Britain and Germany are leaving a trail of carnage and destruction. So far, it had been a war of tanks, aircraft, and infantry. But one man thought there was another, more clever way to fight this war. Scots Guards reservist Lieutenant David Stirling. He suggested special forces be organized in small groups and inserted behind enemy lines, where they could wreak havoc and disrupt lines of communication. In North Africa, the distances between bases and towns were vast. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles of empty terrain. As the Germans advanced, their supply lines were pushed to the limit. Their airfields were also vulnerable, with relatively few men available to guard them. General Auchinleck promoted Stirling and gave him leave to recruit 5 officers and 60 men to wage guerrilla warfare. They were named L Detachment, 1st Special Air Service Brigade, or SAS. The title was deliberately grand, calculated to give the Germans the impression that the British had a complete airborne brigade in Egypt. Although the unit was ostensibly secret, it was featured on film and in a set of official photographs. Perhaps the Middle East headquarters thought Stirling had no chance of success, but could at least distract the enemy. Stirling was determined to prove the SAS was more than just a clever illusion. The first mission in November 1941 was intended as a diversion from the 8th Army offensive Operation Crusader. 55 SAS commandos were dropped by parachute. Their mission was to march from their drop zones to enemy airfields around Tamimi and Gazala. Under cover of darkness, they would then destroy the aircraft with incendiaries and explosives. But by the 16th of November, the desert weather had deteriorated. Due to high winds, the commandos were scattered during their drop. Sandstorms meant supply containers went missing, hidden in the shifting terrain. With little explosives, food or weaponry, Stirling decided to abort the mission. He called on vehicles of the long-range desert group to meet them. Only 22 escaped the failed mission. The rest were missing, either killed or captured. Stirling feared it was the end of the SAS. But Auchinleck had faith in the fledgling unit. A few days after the aborted raid, Stirling met Captain David Lloyd Owen from the long-range desert group. They agreed parachute landings were too dangerous. Lloyd Owen then proposed that long-range desert group reconnaissance vehicles transported the SAS raiders to and from their targets. The SAS would now be driven deep behind enemy lines. During a 2-week period in December 1941, Captain Paddy Mayne led SAS units in raid after raid, destroying 88 Axis aircraft on the ground. Mayne, an Irish international rugby player and renowned boxer, became famous for his SAS exploits. In one raid, he used Lewis bombs. Every SAS raider carried up to 10 of these highly effective incendiary bombs invented by another legendary SAS member, Jock Lewis. On another raid, Maine ran out of Lewis bombs and was forced to disable one aircraft by strength alone. He smashed his way into the cockpit and ripped out the instrument panel with his bare hands. On the 31st of December 1941, Jock Lewis was killed when his vehicle was attacked by German aircraft as he returned from a raid. Stirling and Maine received Distinguished Service Orders. More importantly, they were given permission to expand their unit by a further 46 personnel. In 1942, Free French troops were added to Stirling's order of battle. They joined the SAS in raids against Axis airfields. An unusual feature of these attacks was the role of the commandos of the unit, known as the Special Interrogation Group, led by Captain Herbert Buck. Well-trained and skilled in combat, they smoothed the path for the French SAS raiders to their most difficult targets. Most of Buck's men were German-speaking Palestinian Jews. Some had served in a Jewish commando group. Others had been recruited directly from Jewish underground armies in Palestine. 2 were non-Jewish German prisoners of war. They pretended to be anti-Nazi, but proved in fact to be double agents. The men of the Special Interrogation Group forged German identity documents, wore German uniforms, learnt to drive German trucks, and even secured passwords from real German soldiers. As they traveled behind enemy lines, they wreaked chaos in Rommel's army. Rommel now needed to raise his own special desert forces, and he sent a message to Berlin, requesting the formation of a unit of long-distance scouts. The result was the Africa Company of the Brandenburg Regiment. Codenamed Operation Salam, its mission was to infiltrate German spies into the Egyptian capital of Cairo and gather military intelligence. In May 1942, the Africa Company set off across the vast desert of Libya and Egypt. Illness and mechanical breakdowns plagued the company before it eventually arrived at the drop-off point. But the British were fully aware of Operation Salam, due to the interception of German Enigma codes, and every spy was arrested. By the summer of 1942, the pressure was mounting in their secret desert war. Several SAS attacks were launched on enemy airfields. During these raids, Stirling gained the advantage when he acquired 15 jeeps. These rugged four-wheel drives proved to be ideal platforms for the SAS raiding forces, allowing them to operate independently of the long-range desert group. Each vehicle was fitted with extra fuel tanks, and additional fuel cans extended its range to a 900-mile radius. The vehicle was also equipped with a condenser to recycle and conserve water in arid desert regions. The jeeps were also well armed, with a variety of machine guns mounted on the front and back. The Vickers K and the 50 caliber air-cooled Browning. The Vickers proved ideal for the SAS with their high rate of fire, 1,000 rounds per minute, and were obtained from obsolete RAF fighters. The entire outfit had to be constantly cleaned and maintained to protect it against the harsh desert conditions. Navigational skills were vital for survival in the featureless desert, and the SAS became masters of this art. The Sun Compass, developed by Major Ralph Bagnold, founder of the Long Range Desert Group, was a fundamental navigational aid. Captured Italian and German weapons and supplies also came in handy, such as the stronger, more durable German fuel cans. To fortify them on their long journeys, the SAS were provided with better rations than the average soldier. There were few luxuries in the desert, but the service issue flagons of rum were most welcome during the cold desert nights. Besides carrying camouflage nets for disguise, every SAS jeep was equipped with an escape pack or bailout bag, so that everyone had a basic survival kit in case their vehicle was hit and destroyed. The SAS and its new fighting jeeps were put to their first real test in a series of raids in July 1942. Their targets were Axis airfields. Since demolition charges weren't always reliable, Stirling decided to use his new jeeps to strike at high speed and destroy the Axis aircraft with machine gun fire. On the 26th of July, David Stirling led 14 jeeps in a major night raid on the airfield at Sidi Hanesh. They planned to hit German Ju-52 transport planes, vital to Rommel's army. To the surprise of the attackers, the Axis airfield was lit up to allow their planes to land as they approached. The SAS jeeps formed two attacking columns, one of them led by Paddy May. 68 Vickers machine guns riddled the aircraft with bullets. 3 jeeps and 2 men were lost in the action, but 40 German transport planes were destroyed. An amazing result for such a small attacking unit. Stirling was promoted to lieutenant colonel. The SAS was accorded official regimental status in September 1942, becoming 1st SAS Regiment. By early 1943, the regiment had grown to 5 squadrons and 600 men. But at the pinnacle of Stirling's success during a reconnaissance on the 27th of January 1943, disaster struck. The unit was spotted from the air. That night, they were captured by German troops. In the confusion, Stirling escaped and made his way to some Arabs for help, but they handed him over to the Germans. It was a frustrating end to Stirling's military career. The SAS had lost its leader at a most crucial time, but it would carry on without him, remaining a key weapon in the final stages of the Desert War. Rommel launched a major offensive in North Africa. The British 8th Army was thrown back. Despite their previous victories, the British were demoralized at their continued failure to defeat Rommel. In the first 2 weeks of June 1942, Rommel destroyed almost half the British tank strength and inflicted over 75,000 casualties. The 8th Army was pushed back across Libya to a small railway junction near the Egyptian border called El Alamein. To solve the crisis, Winston Churchill was forced to fly to Cairo. Generals Harold Alexander and Bernard Montgomery replaced Auchinleck, with Monty taking direct command of the 8th Army. In the meantime, Rommel was rewarded by being promoted to the rank of Field Marshal, the youngest in German military history. But what was the secret of his success in the Desert War? An Italian spy in Rome was one of the answers. In January 1941, just before Rommel arrived in North Africa, the spy was employed in the US Embassy in Rome. He was given false identity papers by SIM, the Italian Secret Service. In August, he picked the lock to the safe of the US military attaché and pulled out the Black Code, a secret cipher used by American military attachés throughout the world. The code was photographed and then returned. It was then passed on to the Germans, who used it to decode intercepted secret messages. Colonel Bonner Fellers was the US military attaché in Cairo and kept Washington informed of British military plans by sending a daily report to America using the Black Code. When Fellers transmitted these coded messages from Cairo, they were intercepted by German radio listening stations. This tactical frontline information was obtained by the Third Listening Company of German intelligence. Run by Hauptmann Alfred Seebohm, its listening posts were set up far ahead of the main German forces and refused to budge, even when RAF reconnaissance planes began to target them. The company picked up messages sent between British frontline troops and their headquarters and then relayed the information back to Rommel. They also sent it directly to Berlin. With this information, Rommel was constantly one step ahead of the British. As Rommel anticipated every move of the British Army, British Secret Service agents realized there was something very wrong. It was only when a German listening post was raided that the British discovered the Black Code had been stolen. Fellers was distraught at giving away so much vital intelligence, and he was given a new code. But the British saw an opportunity in this security lapse. They asked Fellers to continue transmitting misleading information with the Black Code, so giving Rommel false leads. Just days later, on the 9th of July, Australian troops were ordered to strike an enemy position in the Tel El Asser area near the Mediterranean coast. Their real target, known only to a few officers in the Allied unit, was Seebohm's listening company. In the middle of the night, the troops moved forward soundlessly. The Italian sentries who manned the lookout posts were caught sleeping and ordered to flee or be shot. The German listening post agents were overrun, but fought back strenuously. Seebohm fought to the last bullet. Surviving soldiers were interrogated. Seebohm was captured but seriously wounded, and later died of those wounds. German radio intelligence had been silenced. The tide was turning in the Desert War. But despite this setback, Rommel planned a final blow to the British position at El Alamein. German reconnaissance reported British Army defences were thin in the southern sector. Elite units of his Afrika Korps steadily moved southwards, leaving dummy vehicles and artillery pieces behind to fool British air reconnaissance. Although maintaining strict radio silence with his ground troops, Rommel made the error of informing his Luftwaffe commander who would support his attack by radio. Earlier in the war, British cryptographers had already cracked the German code. When they intercepted the latest news from Rommel, it was passed on to General Montgomery. He responded by moving the majority of his tanks and 350 artillery pieces to the southern sector. But he needed Rommel to think that he was still weak in the south, and kept tanks and guns well camouflaged. Colonel Francis de Gingand, Montgomery's chief of staff, also realized that German maps previously captured by the British did not reveal the treacherous shifting sands that lay around the Ragil Depression in the south. The entire area was one massive area of quicksand, a potential trap for German tanks. De Gingand worked with Colonel Dudley Clark of A-Force to ensure that Rommel's forces would fall into it. A-Force first identified 2 German spies working in Cairo. John Epler and Peter Munchester were about to become unwitting accomplices. Earlier in the war, Epler made contact with a belly dancer called Hekmat Fahmy at the Kit Kat Cabaret. But Fahmy was also a spy, working for the Muslim Brotherhood, a terrorist organization that wanted the British out of Egypt. Her lover was a Major Smith, part of the British General Headquarters in Cairo. Every time he visited her, Fahmy rifled through his briefcase. Epler then formed another liaison with a girl called Yvette. Yvette was also a spy, working for the Jewish Agency, an organization in alliance with the British Secret Service. She was able to report back that Epler was a German spy. An investigation revealed that the British currency Epler used for his nights out was a clever German forgery. On the 10th of August 1942, Epler and Munchester were arrested along with Hekmat Fahmy. The British also recovered one of their German radio transmitters. The 2 spies were interrogated by Winston Churchill personally, who was in Cairo to oversee a change in command, replacing Auchinleck with Alexander and Montgomery. The 2 spies surrendered their secret cipher based on a copy of a best-selling novel found in Epler's possession. It was now up to the British to exploit this valuable breakthrough. They must outfox the Desert Fox. In August 1942, General Erwin Rommel made his move against Montgomery and the British. But unbeknown to him, British agents were creating a web of deception. Colonel Dudley Clark of A-Force had broken the latest German secret codes and was sending false information to Rommel. These messages reinforced the German general's belief that British forces were weak in the southern sector of El Alamein. One final detail was needed for Rommel to attack in the Regil Depression. De Gingand had a fake map drawn up in which the shifting sand was shown as hard ground, ideal for a panzer attack. Major Smith, facing serious charges for his breach of security in Cairo, was ordered to take the map into the desert and drive towards the German lines as if he were lost. Suddenly, his car exploded. German troops discovered Smith's corpse in the vehicle, along with the false map, and rushed it back to Rommel. British interceptions of German messages revealed his intention to send tanks through the Regil Depression on the night of the 30th of August 1942. Montgomery put his troops on full alert. At 2 a.m., German troops moved towards the British lines. In the treacherous sands, they began to sink. As they tried to dig themselves out, they were bombed by British aircraft. Hundreds of German vehicles were destroyed, and 5,000 elite Afrika Korps soldiers were killed. After 3 days of disastrous fighting, Rommel ordered his men to retreat. The Desert Fox had been outfoxed. On the 23rd of October 1942, Montgomery led a massive counterattack against the Germans and Italians at El Alamein. Again, Dudley Clark and his A-Force were called in for help. Double agents reported that columns of British troops were crossing the Sinai Desert away from Egypt, suggesting that British forces had given up on Egypt and were being withdrawn to protect the oil fields in the Middle East. The misinformation was so effective that Rommel attended an official reception in Germany. Jasper Maskelyne, the stage magician who used trickery to make the Suez Canal vanish, was also called in. This time, he had to make an entire army disappear, 150,000 men, 1,000 guns and tanks. To carry out aerial reconnaissance, an observer needed to know the size of an object to compare everything else to. But in the open desert, there were no measuring indicators. Maskelyne and his magic gang exploited this by creating miniature railways, tanks and trucks, all throwing exactly the right shadows and all in perfect proportion. When the Germans flew over, they were unable to tell if the targets were real. A fake oil pipeline leading southwards was dug in the desert. Maskelyne then devised an ingenious method of disguising a tank as a truck. Together, the deceptions indicated Montgomery's main attack would be launched from the south. But when Monty finally attacked, he did so from the north, opening with a tremendous barrage of artillery. The German army was sent reeling, and Rommel was not even there. The Battle of El Alamein lasted until November. By its end, the Germans were in full retreat. In the House of Commons, Winston Churchill officially recognized the value of the British secret war played out in the desert. He declared, "Through a marvelous system of subterfuge which totally confused our enemy, we were able to convince Rommel that the intentions of the British army were quite different to what they really were, which led to the victory." Hitler had lost North Africa, and in January 1943, Rommel was withdrawn. With further Allied landings in Morocco and Algeria, the Axis powers were defeated in North Africa. The Desert War was over. But many of its lessons of deception, long-range raids and subterfuge were employed in later campaigns. The stepping stones to victory over Hitler were some of the greatest secrets of the Second World War.